Hello and welcome to another episode of the Way We Grow podcast. Today our guest is at Westin_Peace on Instagram. He is an outdoor organic home grower. I am your host, Nick Wolfe. So, Westin, how's it going?
It's going good.
Awesome.
Excited to be on here.
Yeah, I mean, you're one of the most prolific outdoor home growers that I know of on the subreddit that we are both moderators of, the r/craft marijuana subreddit. And I feel like you always take a lot of time and effort to put into your outdoor crop each year. But, how's life going in the off season?
In the off season, it's me arguing with myself about trimming and starting to think about what changes I want to make next year and how I got a couple months, and if I do want to make changes, what I'm going to do and how I'm going to implement it. But normally it's just trimming and kind of brainstorming about what's going to happen next year.
For sure. Yeah, I feel that. I feel like it's like this time of year is always the time of year that at like a commercial level we are looking at genetic acquisition and starting to plot out where we're going to plant the different genetics based on their flowering time. Sometimes we have the ability to map it out based on their flower initiation, because we'll have some that'll start, 2 to up to 4 or 5 weeks before the rest. And they still only need 65 to 70 days of flower.
Well,
So
that makes sense too, because you don't want to be running all around the garden to, like, all the stuff that's going to finish early is here, the next
Right.
and the next, so you don't have people scrambling around. That makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. So what in your garden this year upcoming? What do you have planned? Is there anything that you've already started to look into?
I have been, as you know, on the craft group, hitting up all of the gromies on there, trying to start doing genetics from the craft group solely. Is my main goal.
That's cool.
Because normally I buy clones, and I have a reputable source, and I do appreciate them and like them, but it would be cool to start putting up for, instead of growing, things from giant breeders, start hitting up all the homies and started growing, within the group. I think that's a good idea, and I'm kind of stoked about doing it.
How many times have you ran from seed outside versus from clone? Do you feel as though it's like a pretty even split, or?
No, not even. I would rather do clones. Just because you know what you're getting and every plant's going to be the same. So season...
Got it.
My garden now, I'm on season... I just finished season 4. So season 3, I did all seeds. Except for maybe 2 or 3 plants. And I was super stoked with some of them, and I was less stoked with some of the other ones. And also, the variation in finishing time. I'd rather have 2 or 3 that I know are going to finish all at the same time, rather than having, 15 different plants that are all skewed across the finishing lines. And, like, also you get into where, like, you notice certain plants have specific needs. Well, I'm not here all the time, and I have to have something that I can kind of get into a routine on. If I can figure out 2 plants, fairly quickly in the season, it's easier than me trying to play it by ear on 15 different, 15 different splits.
For sure. I mean, especially because for all those listeners that don't know, you use raised pots, correct? Like fabric pots
yeah.
for your
Let's
plants.
see. So if you get on Reddit, I have a bunch of pictures, but I used raised pots. I used fabric pots, was pretty standard. I do have a gravel base under each one of them, and this last year I moved up to 200-gallon pots. But yes,
Oh, wow.
I used raised pots off the ground, and then I have a buffer between the ground soil and the bottom of the pot. I found that in rainy seasons that your pot touches the ground, especially if you live somewhere where water is going to be running down, like the way our property is laid out. It will run off the hill and come down and run through the garden. That they will just be soaking water up. Like if it rains for a week, even lightly, the ground gets wet, and then they're constantly wicking moisture, so that kills your ability to water very much, because you got to keep the top kind of wet, but then you can't feed, and you can't, like, you want to do something, the pot's already saturated, and you can't, it kind of slows your ability to make a move.
That makes sense. That's a cool application of using gravel for like almost like a raised water table, where
Yes.
you're getting it outside of the zone of the flooding that's coming down through your property there.
You live and you see it a couple of years, and you may, had to, kind of fine tune it. You see what you see. I didn't know the first year that was going to happen, and then you see it, and then by then I wanted to run the life of my last plots out in soil, and then so when I moved up and switched, then I went ahead and made those changes.
Nice. Well, I want to come back to your growing style, but I want to find out first, in your growing journey, what were some of the first plants that you ever grew, whether it be cannabis or otherwise? We've had some people on here where cactus was their first plant that their grandma gave them or something. And then some people that never grew even a vegetable before they started growing cannabis. And then they started venturing into the world of other gardening and applications of the knowledge that they've gained from growing cannabis. So for you, what was your first experience growing any type of plant?
My first experience in growing was in Missouri. I had a buddy who was growing indoor and needed to move it somewhere due to some circumstances that were not favorable. And so I took them in and started growing them. And then I didn't, let me phrase this how I was going to say it, realized how complicated it was, but also how interesting it was at the same time. And that's really, really, I've taken what knowledge I have from cannabis and moved it outwards, because I really wasn't into like very much agriculture before that, any house plants or anything.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. It's like I said, it's kind of a split 50-50 of people that started, oh, grandma had a vegetable garden and I helped her out with it. Or I had no care for vegetables or other gardening. And then cannabis was my gateway drug into gardening. So,
I mean, it has the power to do that,
it definitely does. Well, that's really cool to hear. What do you like to garden now other than cannabis? Is there anything else that you have in your garden? Because I know you have a pretty big sort of garden space.
We have azaleas. My wife has all the stuff around the house. I don't. We have mint and rosemary and lemon balm. And the thing that I appreciate the most is she grows angel wing begonias, and that is one of my favorite plants.
Those are
Just
those
the
are
way
so
it
cool.
grows and the way it flowers it's something special about that one. But she grows angel wing begonias, and I put in the compost tea and help keep them going.
Nice, nice. Well, let's go and touch back then on some of your first cannabis growing adventures, I guess. So it sounds like your first experience was almost put like in an emergency situation where you were helping a friend out by taking plants from a non-ideal situation, putting them in a situation where you could help them out. What did you learn from that? How did you go about deciding how you were going to continue to grow these plants, and did you get to a successful harvest?
Yes, I took them when they were just in flower, and I brought them over. And this probably wasn't a very good experience to bring up, but it really got my. I mean, as small as it was, got my feet wet. I think it was about 12 plants, but I brought them from his house over to mine, and we got them to flower, and we got them to harvest, and we got them got them dried, and that was kind of what sparked me into it. And then as far as my first big adventure was deciding to move out of Missouri and move to California and just be like, here we go.
Cool. So once you kind of took that step from Missouri to California, it sounds like was like cannabis cultivation in your mind? Was that something that you were kind of driven by in any way?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Because, I don't know if you've ever lived in the Midwest, but I want to say before like 2012, I mean, the amount of decent weed you could get was okay, but it's kind of perplexing when you know how things work on the West Coast to see like trash run, like to see garbage come in there, and you're like, how does this product make it to the end market? Like, there's no
Yeah.
no reason. And then I wanted to move somewhere, and I was picking Colorado or California, and I came out to trim camp one year at a buddy's house. And then me and my wife, my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, I was like, we're moving to California. And she was like, oh, if you're okay with it. And I was like, let's do it. And I kind of moved out here. Didn't really have anywhere to live. When I got out of here, I got in contact with my friend and then just started working for him when I got here.
Cool. Like at a cannabis farm or something, or
Yeah, at a farm.
cool. How was your experience with the cannabis farms, like in terms of a commercial cultivation operation?
There's the good and there's the really bad. Back then there was the good and then there was the atrocious, and it depended on where you went. You could see things that you didn't want to see, or as far as just talking about growing, like people spraying, Avid and fluoramide or doing whatever they can to compensate for their lack of skill to get a product to the end market, without far any consequences or not thinking about anything outside of, out of profit. And then you see people who cared about it, and you really kind of see the difference in growers when you travel around and see the different farms, because there's a stark difference, or was a stark difference for the growers that are still around.
For sure. Did you only have that one commercial experience with your friend that you worked with, or did you? It sounds like you were looking at other farms, at least by their practices. Did you have an opportunity to work with any of them?
Oh, yeah. So I came out and I worked with my buddy the first and the second year, and then I got hired on to a big farm up in Lake County, California. And so it was 70 acres total, two 35-acre plots on the side of a mountain. So old school black market farm. And there were tiered into the side of this mountain were 5 by 5 by 5 poles. And so all tiered down, what do you want to call it? All cut out of the mountain were these holes, and they were just, I don't know, like 400 gallons of dirt in each hole or more. And so I started doing that. And that ended in a raid, which wasn't very fun. But after that, I worked greenhouses. I worked for another farmer, and then in between getting growing jobs, I would go around and do piecemeal work at other farms. So, I mean, I probably worked at, 15, 16 different places.
Okay. Are there any experiences that you had while working at those places that stand out that you'd feel comfortable talking about, just to kind of spread a little bit of the experiential knowledge?
Well, that's a vast question. Like, what kind of experiences? Good experiences, bad, like
Well,
eye-opening
it's
experiences, or like inspirational, or kind of like what got me going?
let's take it from the route of through your experience working at all these different facilities, at all these different farms. What did you pick up that you carried with you, and what were things that you knew you needed to avoid when having your own grow?
Avoiding laziness, because what a lot of the farmers, well, because there was so much money into it back in the day, is that someone would own a property and they wouldn't necessarily, they would know how to grow, but they would be as hands off as they could with it. And the lack of attentiveness is a huge thing. Like trying to automate your outdoor grow is, I don't want to say it's lazy. I mean, there's obviously perks to it, but if you're not an attentive grower, you need to be in the, if you're not in the garden, you don't know what's going on. Like, I don't care how many people you hire. Like, if you're the one in charge of it and you're not there, it's not going to go well. 100% going to fail. If you try to subcontract your job to somebody else who has less experience than you, it always turns out bad. And so that's like kind of what you learn is like, if you want this to go from the start to the finish as well as it can, like you can't go on vacation. You can maybe take 2 days, 3 days off at the most. Like, I mean, but you need to be there and you need to be in the garden every other day. Hands down. That's like that's what, people who aren't into growing and start growing outdoor, it's not a hands-off thing by any means. I mean, there's lots of watching and sitting and watching, but there's also a purpose to that too. And that's like, you need to know when you might have a bug infection start or an infestation starting, or you need to know, hey, these things look like they're getting underwatered, because by the next morning they look, like there's a lot of what you are going to need to know about the plants is just going to be staring at them. If it sounds stupid, but when you start doing it, you're going to realize that. I mean, like, go sit out there for an hour in the morning and at night and in the mid afternoon and watch the differences and, start tracking how they're reacting.
Right. Definitely like picking up on the trends so that you can apply the proper approach, whether it be through like an IPM practice or nutrient application, especially if you're growing in some sort of living soil situation or something where you're using the biology to make the nutrients readily available. You have to really be almost ahead of the curve on that, where you can't be like reactory, you have to be proactive about it, and that
Oh,
takes a lot of
100%.
attention. Yeah.
Because I mean, 95% of what you're going to use organically is not water soluble. So if you see a problem, you're already late. You're late to the game by the time you pick up on it.
Right.
And that's where you kind of got to learn what to do ahead of time, because by the time you figure out you did something wrong, now you've spent a week trying to correct that, but you were already a week behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
Couldn't
hard
agree
to,
more.
it's hard to explain that to people. It's like by the time you see the problem, you're already late to the game. You're already late to the party.
For sure. Right, as opposed to like hydroponics where you could just have like missed a couple of pHings for a day or two and it's gonna go catastrophic. You're gonna see a lot of issues pop up from that, and then uh, both of them kind of have their positives and negatives. And I think that, you know, that is definitely a conversation for another day. But it's so fascinating to hear. I do love organics when you like use the analogy of a battery, where the bigger the battery, the more like runtime you have without having to worry too much about it. So you know, I kind of want to get back into how you're growing now and how you developed your growing style. And so you kind of told us about your negative experience with these different cultivation jobs that you had. What were some of the things that you picked up from these different jobs that you took with you and either tried to apply to subsequent cultivation experiences, or what you still keep in your tool belt that you're using today?
Well, and that's, yes, I love that question because a lot of the negative experiences are learning what not to do, working in other peaceful places. And a good thing about that is you get to see a wide array of people trying different things and seeing what works and what doesn't work without having to experience them yourself. Because with outdoor growing, you get one shot a year. So the ability to rerun something over and over to figure out what's going on, what works and what doesn't work could take a decade, you know, like, because you're not doing 5, 6 runs a year and you're not like, okay, that works, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. But what I did pick up is, as far as outdoor growing goes, I really don't like synthetics or non-organic food sources. I don't feel like they perform as well just from what I've seen. And I don't like, indoors completely different story, but outdoors, if you a compost tea any day, 100% of the time, my money's on it. So as far as what I've learned that works is compost teas, figuring out your watering, and then as far as food sources going, just using a good multi-purpose food in the beginning and then kind of playing it with some top dresses by year throughout the year. Because your compost tea, if you have a good compost tea, is going to provide a lot of nutrition, because you're not pumping them. You don't need a lot of nutrition. You just need something consistent, and you need a ability for the soil to unlock what food is already in there, and that's what a compost tea does.
Absolutely. What's your typical go-to compost tea, if you're just applying something throughout the
I
year?
would do about 4 to 8 cups of worm castings, 4 cups of compost, and the worm castings and the type of compost you get are going to make a night and day difference. If you get some compost from the grocery store and it has sticks and twigs and it looks like it's meant for, you know, mulch for someone like flower bed, it's not going to work. So you need a high compost or a high quality compost. And I mean, there's a couple different you can use. Like there's the sea compost from Oregon. There's the Malibu blend, which I really don't like because it comes from, it's steer manure and there can be bugs and stuff in it. I've learned that over the years to avoid that. But basically earthworm castings, compost, kelp meal, alfalfa meal, maybe a little bit of humic acid, maybe a little bit of azomite, and then just blackstrap molasses, or just
Nice.
molasses you can get at a grocery store.
And do you do like aeration for it, or do you do like just a quick mix?
No, do an aeration and you're going to run it about 24 hours. And doing outdoor temperature is a big thing, so you never want to start it in the morning. If you start it in the morning and it sits in the sun all day, you can like try to cover it with light, but the temperature is really going to play into it. So you want to start it at night, run it all night, check it in the morning, probably run it the rest of the day, and by the next morning it's going to be popping off, and you'll see the foam and you'll see all the CO2 coming out of it, and that's how you know you're where you want to be.
Cool. That's pretty cool. So as you were learning all these different sort of methods and finding that, you know, compost teas and the applications of different composts and worm castings and stuff are extremely beneficial. What did you start to develop in terms of your other top dressing practices or other growing practices that you're still using today?
Thinning out the plants. You've seen outdoor plants. A lot of people don't know. If you have a plant that's 10 feet tall, I mean, you're going to say from the stalk out, at least 40% of that needs to be cleaned out, because you're not going to get any light breaking through there. And so what you learn is if you leave all of that on there, it's going to kill the size of your buds and also create a place for mold. So you really want to worry about airflow. That's another good one. Keeping your plants spread apart and not having them grow into each other is going to stop bugs from spreading. I've seen gardens get ravished by broad mites. I mean, but if you have everything right next to each other, you're never like you're not going to stand a chance because they're going to spread too quick.
For sure. Yeah, we typically will grow in rows, but it is like a much larger production. What I'm doing at like the commercial facility versus what you're doing at your home. And I love how you have your different beds sort of separated out, and how you have the ability to kind of address each plant's needs in a very holistic approach of applying a meal of this, or this, that, or the other thing, in an organic form. What have been some of your recent let's ask this in a two-part question. So, in terms of what has worked really well for you recently in the garden, what would some of those things be, and what would also be some things that haven't worked very well for you in the garden recently? Sort of the pros and the yeah.
Okay. Worked very well since I moved to this spot. Not worrying about the height or the size of the plant. I found that over the last couple of years that the amount of soil you have is going to correlate with how much bud you're going to get off the plant, regardless of the size of the plant. So trying to plant early to get larger plants generally isn't going to yield anything more than you planting 2 weeks later and having a smaller but a fatter plant, which is a good thing to know. I don't think a lot of people realize that, because if you see it, I had one from seed last year that was 12 feet tall. All it did was create a headache, a lot of plant to work on, and got the same thing that a plant that was, 6 to 7 feet tall would have had on it.
Sure.
So I guess training and not trying to shoot for the largest plant competition is a really good one, because when it comes to working on them and not having a limited amount of time to do that, is you don't want to have to be trucking a ladder around, or if you can't see the tops of the buds, you don't know if a caterpillar got in, or you create this scenario where you're not gaining anything but a lot more work to get the same end result. And I don't think a lot of people realize that too. You can get oohed and awed by a big plant and they are very cool, but when you're the one taking care of it, it's not necessarily very cool.
No. And then also it feels like a lot of the especially in an organic scenario, a lot of the productivity potential for each plant is heavily dependent upon the root space of that plant. And 100%. So if you're And so if you're growing in a limited root space, say like a raised pot or a raised bed of some kind, or you're planting them in a row or something else where they are then sort of butting up on each other, so they only have a specific square footage per plant that they have like sole dominance over, versus the other plants then coming in and their roots interchanging. So they only have a certain amount that they can work with. And so, yeah, if you're going to get a bigger plant, then sure, you're going to have a bigger biomass, but all that bigger biomass is taking energy away from what could be flower site production.
100%.
I mean, I even see this in indoor too. Like smaller plants usually produce the danker buds. They can just put a lot more effort into it, especially when you're talking about similar pot sizes. Growing up,
if you were going to have a 3-4 footer next to a 2 footer and the same amount of pot with the same amount of roots, you're going to it's going to focus more energy into production.
For sure.
100%.
It might not be the like comparable yields. Like you might get more yield out of the 3 or 4 footer next to the 2 footer. But each individual flower might have a little bit more appeal to it. It might have a better genetic expression or morphology. Sometimes those bigger plants, when you grow too many bud sites on them, the flowers seem to lose a little bit of that luster that would be on something that is a more manicured plant that has fewer bud sites as it relates to the root size.
Yeah, and I think that like with outdoor too, and especially with organic, because you're not able to pump it. Like there's only so much you can do to feed it, right? You can do a compost tea, which is going to start creating a bioavailable nutrient, but not necessarily in a large amount. That you want to really keep an eye on your soil size to your plant size, because as above, so below. Like you don't want your plant 5 times bigger than the pot. I mean, you want to have it maybe, your flowering plant 2 to 3 times bigger than your like the soil area width and height wise, because you're
Mm-hmm.
going to run into that. We're going to get stringier buds. Like you can have as many bud sites on it as you want, but if it doesn't have, you can have a Cadillac, but if you put a 4 cylinder in there, it's not going to be like you got to keep everything. You got to keep everything balanced. You can't
For
have a
sure.
giant plant with no soil and no food, and no ability to feed it. Um,
Right.
so you got to kind
It
of keep that in mind.
it almost seems like oversizing the pot to the plant size tends to provide the longest runway for what's available, and so the plant can just it can do the best that it can do in the environment without being limited by something like a the root size or
Yeah,
something like that.
100%. And then I don't think, I don't know that a lot of people think this, but like if you're organic growing, and I don't know how analogy to put this, you're like the pit crew at NASCAR. You're not the race car driver. Like you're there trying to make sure everything's ready for
Mm-hmm.
when it wants to use it. You're not the one, putting the gas on, steering the wheel. You're just trying to be there, and you're trying to give the plant everything it needs so it can do what it wants to do. But like if you try to take the reins too much, that's when you're going to go off the rails, because it's only going to do what it wants to do, and like you need to be there and make sure that it has what it needs. But it's like you're not really steering the car. You're just trying to making sure that it's fueled.
For sure. And even in that same analogy of like a race car, right? You're not trying to run the fuel to empty. You're going to try and fill it up before it gets too low, because you don't want to throw that race car off balance by having a weight increase and decrease that's going to sort of like make that battery of the root zone overcharged or undercharged. You want to kind of keep it at this nice level so that it has the buffet to eat from without ever needing to feel like it needs to wait for that buffet to get refilled.
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, and that plays into pH too, because if you don't keep everything, as far as being able to control pH in a pot outdoors, you can't. All you can
No.
do is do everything right so that it has so it doesn't go out of balance. Because I mean, if you overfeed, over compost tea, put too much, you can go too acidic. Or if you want to over amend with like azomite, or you want to use like a silica rock based product, you gotta pick, you gotta kind of keep giving it in the middle ground so it has what it needs, or it will go out of pH, which is, it happens rarely, but when it does, like you're kind of you shot your foot there, you're done.
Yeah, I agree. It is one of those things where it is a boat. So like it's hard to oversteer it, but if you do oversteer it, it's really hard to correct it. So little tiny tweaks here and there always seem to work the best, as opposed to these giant fluctuations in additions or subtractions to what's there and available for the plant. So I want to ask, in your current setup, since you did just restart into larger, did you say 200-gallon pots?
I went from 150 to 200. Yes.
Okay. So did you restart that all from scratch? Did you do a fresh mix of new potting mix and substrate, or did you use older substrate?
No, I went with new substrate.
Okay. What's your ideal mix like? If how about you run us through what you did to prepare those 200-gallon beds, so that anybody that's thinking about growing some large outdoor plants has an idea of what it takes to get one of those started.
Well, it depends. So, your soil that you're going to want to use is really going to be kind of dependent on your growing style. And the thing to not get carried away with if you were starting from scratch is you don't need a heavily fed soil. You don't need a hot soil. You don't need something with, that's loaded up with every single amendment on the earth on it. You want something very simple. You want perlite, peat moss, um, pH balance. You want a buffer in there, and maybe a very light food. And then that allows you to amend it yourself. Because the first year I got soil, I got, it was basically like a grow shop's version of like Fox Farm or something, but they had loaded it out. It had every amendment. Like you stick your hand in the bag and it would burn your hand. Like it was hot. Like there was a lot going on there. And what that kind of kills your ability to do is do anything else, because it's already been done. Like if you were trying
Sure.
to make a change, like you already, everything's under the sun's already in there. You can't do anything with it, which doesn't mean it's bad. It means you're going to want to run water. You're going to run a light tea. That's about as far as you're going to go with it. What I like to do now is get a more basic soil without a lot of food. I found that down to earth biofish is a very, very good amendment for the beginning. So I'll amend per bag with biofish and make sure it's really well mixed in there. And then I will pre-water all the pots and try to keep them wet for a week or two before I'm going to plant in there to like start the biological process in there, get everything alive, get everything working. And then you want to check to make sure your soil's not hot, because if your soil's hot, you're going to burn your plants. And that's like one thing that no one ever teaches you. Like, hot soil is literally outdoors. It's going to be hot. Like, you're going to put your hand in there and it's going to be steam coming out of it. You want to
Sure.
kind of kick off the biological process and let that work its way through a little bit before you're going to plant your plants in there.
So it's like almost making a fresh super soil or a living soil of sorts, where you're taking your porosity fraction of the media, like your perlite or your pumice or volcanic rock or anything like that. Then your substrate side, peat moss, cocoa coir, anything like that. And then your biological side, which is also kind of a substrate side, where it's your compost, adding all those together, then adding your sources of nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, all those different macros and micros, mixing those all together, and all of a sudden you have all this biological activity, and that biological activity is pushing off a bunch of heat, and you want to wait for that biological activity to kind of slow down, because you're right, it just, not only is it like hot in terms of the chemical or the nutrient availability is going to be so high that the plant's going to be burnt through the osmotic stress of the electrical conductivity of everything that falls into solution while the biology is that active, but also the actual thermophilic composting that's occurring, that's going to overheat the root zone and cause hypothermia to the roots, and actually cause death and decay.
You translated that way better than what I was saying, but yes, 100%. It's like, that's when you hear hot soil, everybody thinks nutrients. Well, like, hot soil is literally temperature hot soil, and even if it will burn, it will kill the plant just based because, I mean, it could be like, when you're looking at the summer here, it's like 70. I mean, if you stick your hand in there and it's 95 degrees, you put a plant in there, it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a 95-degree root zone is not great, especially when you're going from 60 degrees to 95 degrees. That's like, maybe you could slowly get up to 95 degrees and hold it for a few days if you have available water, but definitely not if it's just from no 1 to the 9.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it can handle higher temperatures in the summer. Like this summer, it was 112 degrees for a week straight, and the plants were definitely, they were not having it, but they held through. But if you did that to a younger plant, it would, it'd be game over.
It's also one of the reasons why you have to turn thermophilic compost, because it'll combust if you have it at the like perfect level of dryness to wetness ratio, and you have the right amount of enzymes in there. The outside temperature and humidity aren't disadvantageous for causing a fire to start. It'll just spontaneously combust and
I have never
catch
seen that
flame.
when we look at videos now.
My dad had compost in our backyard, and it caught on fire one year, and he had to spray it down with a hose. It was crazy. I didn't know it could happen either until I saw it. But now I'm always very cautious about making thermophilic compost.
The power of the microbe.
Yeah, that fact that they can get that hot all the way up to the point of combustion and still be active.
Yeah, that's insane.
It makes me think of those like the extremophiles that live near the thermal vents in the bottom of the ocean. That it's like,
where the water would boil if it could, but it's under so much pressure it can be higher than boiling water temperatures. Yeah,
right. Yeah, 200-300 degree water, and these crabs and crustaceans and worms and stuff are living, and they're fine with it. Nature's crazy, and it's really cool to know that there are these extreme differences between something that does use this biologically active substrate versus a non-biologically active substrate in like hydroponics, and you can achieve really great results with both, and the interactions between the rhizosphere and the substrate and the nutrients that are either being produced biologically or being introduced through the nutrient water package, the reaction with the roots is also super different too. Like, the root exudates that are produced in an organic media to help attract the specific biology that's going to help chelate the specific nutrients to make them available. There's something really cool about that.
I mean, how long did that process take to develop in nature? I mean, it's, that's what kind of why I don't doubt it either. Because, I mean, it, for millions of years, this has worked, and like, it's like the whole thing is already organized.
Yep. It's like the soil food web that Dr. Elaine Ingham will preach through her different books and classes and stuff. It makes a lot of sense that you have these different processes that have developed over time to help cycle and process phosphorus and nitrogen and potassium and carbon and all these different things that you can like actually now put through that scientific lens and explain where it's still all those interactions together are almost harder to explain as a whole rather than the each individual processes.
Oh, well, yeah, because you look at one part of it and it's like, okay, so the plant is going to, put carbohydrates into the soil to attract something. You're like, oh, that makes sense. Well, then it also does 20 other things, and there's sugar it produces out through the stomata to keep bugs away that'll kill bugs. Like, it's like you start looking at all of it and you're like, this is very well orchestrated.
It is. It is. So back to you building your current setup. So when you were building these beds, I remember you said that you had a rock layer at the bottom. Did you layer the pots in any other ways? And did you add anything else, like either on top of the substrate or within the substrate, to kind of help with a specific style that you were going for?
Yeah, so this year, which I normally don't do, and I had kind of, goes back to your questions of things that have mixed results, was doing a top dress layer of, can't remember, I have to look at the grass, but clover and some other grasses and some legumes, some type of peas to keep the sun from beating down on the soil. So a lot of the problem with outdoor growing is that you're going to have a large pot and you're going to have it dry from the bottom up and the top down at the same time, and leave a section in the center as it's using the water, and as the sun's evaporating the water, you're going to end up with, a dry bottom of your pot and a dry top of your pot and a wet center of your pot, which is going to mean you're going to overwater the center. And to get the bottom wet, you're going to have to really overwater the center to get the water down to the bottom of the pot from the top. And then you're going to have the top of the pot drying out and killing all of your food web roots on the top of the soil that run about, I don't know, maybe they run a foot deep from the top of the soil. And so I did a cover crop, which worked extremely well, but not thinking about it or never doing it before, it attracts a lot of bugs. You get a lot of pests brought in because there's a whole, like, 5 different food sources you just brought onto the scene,
Yeah.
like right in the same vicinity of your plant, which I would do it again if I used something that didn't grow as high, that wouldn't grow up into the bottom of the plant and like literally have a ladder into the plant.
Like a
But
climbing pea or something, or
yeah, you threw up a ladder right up into your bud, so that anything
Yeah.
that walks on the ground can make it up in there. Not that it couldn't before, but now you make it a lot easier. But I don't
Sure.
really layer the soil. I just put the soil in. I don't have. I mean, a lot of people do super soils where we want the bottom of the soil to be one thing, in the middle to be another, and the top to be another. Really, just do one soil. Make sure it's amended well and evenly distributed, and then I like the idea of straw better on top of the pots to add that buffer so they're not getting beat down by the sun,
like a mulch layer.
like a mulch layer, or just something. You don't really want mulch, you want something inert, because you don't want any biological composting process to start on top of your soil, because that's going to be not be good. But
Okay.
yeah, like an inert straw, something that will get wet but won't like start to break down and decompose in the top, just to add a buffer for the light, or a buffer for sun and heat radiation.
Cool. Kind of helps trap in some of the moisture too, so you're not losing too
Yes.
much through evaporation.
You're losing
Yeah,
some
that-
evaporation, and then you're keeping your soil temps down. Which, I mean, just keeping your soil temp down is kind of a lost battle. There's only you can get, and don't get a black pot, and don't let the sun touch the top of the soil. That's about all you can do. So, I mean, you can with outdoor. There's only so much you can control, and you just gotta kind of figure out what you can. It's like the AA prayer: control what you can control and don't worry about what you can't. But like, figure out what you can do, and then you got to do that very well.
Fair enough. Were there any other things that you implemented this year that you hadn't in years prior that you felt was a great improvement to your plants, or did you add anything that you kind of felt as though hindered your ability to tune the plants the way that you like to?
I don't think that I really did anything to hinder myself this year other than bad strain choices. Because if you saw my pictures, I had one strain that did phenomenally well, and then I had one strain that I was very disappointed in, and because it couldn't handle heat stress, it was untrainable. It just anything that I was going to do with it, it would not take it, and that at that point you just gotta let it run. If you try to, I don't like to top plants. I like to just bend them over and get new shoots to come off. I feel like when
Sure.
you top them, it kills your yield, and it sets the plant back about a week or so if you're going to cut on it. So if you are going to top it, you want to top it before you plant it in there. But strain choice outdoors it's massive. Like you can get one, like I had one that just and then you have half your garden set on that, and you're okay with it. But I mean, at a certain point, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I agree. We've even just stopped even doing any training on outdoor plants. I mean, especially because they're in rows and you have 30 or 40 plants per row. It doesn't really make too much sense to try and even the canopy. It kind of becomes a hedge either way.
Well, you have more surface area too if it's not even.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, you have
that.
peaks and valleys versus a flat plain always has more surface area. That's the same reason why we tend to not top indoors either, is because if you have a completely even canopy in a 4x4 area, then you only have 16 square feet of available surface area directly down from the light. But if you have peaks and valleys, you can sometimes 1.5x to double your total surface area, which just means more photon absorption. So
Yeah.
It's a great point for people to think about when you do have the outdoors, though, where the sun as a single point, but spread across such a large surface area at such high ppfd, and the fact that it moves across the sky, you have this ability to really capture light on almost all different sides of the plant, especially when you're down in like California, not too high on the latitudes. You get a lot of that really nice light. And so it almost feels like you could top it, you could spread it out, you could do whatever you want with it. If they're not growing directly next to each other, they're going to capture, a ton of energy from the sun.
Oh, 100%. Like that's I've noticed I have a tree that overhangs one part of my garden, and around high noon, so whenever the brightest of the day, between about 12 and 1:32 p.m., it blocks a couple of the plants off, and you notice the quality of the bud on those plants will be a little bit higher and the yield is going to be lower. But like right when the ppfd is going to be too high, I want to say too high, but extremely high. If you can block that off, and that's like a lot of the advantage of a greenhouse is that you're taking that and lowering it down a little bit, and your quality is going up.
Sure, you're making like a more even spread of the light at a lower intensity rather than that sort of high peak intensity of the midday and low intensity of the morning and afternoon.
100%.
Yeah. So, out of all the aspects of your gardening nowadays, what do you think is one of the most important things that you do in your garden that you might not have touched on so far? Or if you've already touched on it, maybe dive a little bit deeper into its importance to your gardening.
I say watering is probably going to be your biggest factor in anything. If you're not watering correctly, that anything else you do is going to be, it starts with watering. Everything has to be null and void. So really keeping an eye on how much water your plants are using and how much is evaporating is going to be a huge factor. Because that's, especially, I want to say organic, because your microbes are going to die if you get it too dry, and they're going to die if it's too wet, and you're going to get mold if it's too wet, you're going to get fungus and root rot if it's too wet. So that is like, if you have a good soil and you can keep the water in the pot at the exact level you want, the amount of moisture, you're going to have the best results by far.
For sure. What are some of your watering practices? Like, what are some of the tells that you look for, and what are some of the other insights you might be able to share with other outdoor growers that might be looking into doing something in these larger raised pots where you have because you have like matrix potential would be something where you're actually using soil, sand, silt, and clay, where the water availability is dependent upon that matrix potential, whereas within substrate you have osmotic potential, and you actually have water available within the pore space of these substrates that are made out of it's like a soilless media where you don't have sand, silt, or clay. So, what are some of these practices that you do with your substrate? And if you could also just really quick touch on what substrate did you use for these 200
I
gallon
used
pots?
I used Vital Earth's blend of soil,
Cool.
which is it's pretty good soil. I've never used it before. It was a little bit pricey because they're proud of themselves, and not in a negative way, but Vital Earth is kind of a posh brand. Their
Sure.
soil is the only soil you can find that doesn't have any dairy manure, anything related to dairy farming in it, which is one of the big things, because dairy farming and the byproducts of it are not nice at all when you start
Yeah.
looking into that. Um, but I did that, and as far as watering goes, is that you want to water every day. You don't want to not water every day. If you're not watering for 4 days at a time, there's a problem. And if you're watering every day and it's dry every day, that's also a problem. You want to get to the fine medium where you're watering every day to keep it. So I don't use a moisture meter, so I have no way to tell you how to verify this. But wherever your wherever your moisture level you want it to be, you want it to drop down a little bit every day and bring it back up a little bit past that every day, and you want to keep it in this range. Because if you let your soil go all dry, if you let your soil dry out, it's going to become hydrophobic, and that's going to make it really hard to water it and get it wet in the next day or two without having to literally run water through the pot until it's coming out the bottom, and even then you might have dry pockets within there.
For sure.
So
You're
what
gonna get
you
like
don't
channeling and stuff as well.
you get channeling, or you can think the pot is full of water, and you can stick your hand down in there, and you'll find just dry. There'll just be dry areas in there where it doesn't get wet. So once you let it get past the point of being too dry, it's going to be hard to get it as a whole back to where you want it to go.
For sure.
And
It
it's
kind of
hard for
makes me think of a circadian rhythm where you really want, like, because the plants kind of have this 24-hour cycle, just like humans do, where you have the sun coming up and going down. And it's something that has just sort of genetically been embedded in our code. Following that with plants does help, it seems, with their overall health rather than having these extremely long points of drying and then high irrigation. You can run into like hypoxia events or stuff at that point as well too, where you have too much water in the substrate. But yeah, finding that perfect sort of balance
Yeah, it's
within the
hard. I don't want to
substrate.
sound very layman on here, but it's hard to explain if you're not using a moisture meter, because you can't say it needs to be here, it needs to go there, it needs to go there. It's kind of all played by ear, and explaining it would be easier in person to show you what I mean. But another thing too about that is, if you go out at night and your soil feels dry, and you go out in the morning and your soil looks wet, the amount of water that the plant is dumping back into the soil at night can also trick you too. Because if the soil is dry at night and it's wet in the morning, it's not wet all the way through the pot. You still need to water it. But the amount of water that is up in the plant that comes down when it goes to, I don't want to say goes to sleep, but when it goes to sleep is going to be a lot of volume, especially with a large plant. So you got to be careful not to get tricked by that, because if you go out, in the evening before the sun goes down, and you're like, oh, these need water, and you go out in the morning and they look like they don't need water, they still need water.
For sure. Yeah, you get a lot of condensation too on the top of soil just from the temperature change from night to day. And yeah, I've definitely seen that where it looks like it's fine, and then all of a sudden it's starting to look drought stressed with some wilting leaves, or perhaps some, red petioles, or yellowing around the fringes, or some other sort of high EC osmotic stress that you might
Or you
see.
start seeing the bottom start to yellow out, and yellow from
Yep.
you'll start, yeah, 100%.
Right.
But it's kind of
And
tricky.
I feel like another really good point to bring up, especially when you are running a heavily amended substrate, that you're using that biological activity, that by maintaining a certain moisture content, you're also maintaining the health of the biology within the pot, for those nutrient cycling processes to continue to occur at a healthy rate rather than booms and busts, because that can
100%.
cause some burning or nutrient imbalances I've seen as well.
Or you can kill off part of your roots. I mean, your roots will go brown in different areas of the pots, which you won't see. Or if you start, yeah. Another thing too, a good way to gauge it too, is if you have fungus growth in your pots and you can maintain fungus growth, like fruiting bodies, that's how you know you kind of hit the perfect zone.
Hmm.
And it's
That's
hard
a
to
really
explain.
great point.
Yeah, but if you can have fruiting mushrooms in the pots and you can keep them alive and they keep fruiting over and over again, you know you're like right where you need to be because you
For
can
sure.
use that as a gauge to the whole soil health as a whole.
That's a really good way to sort of explain it for anybody that's grown, say, mushrooms, because when you make your grains for the different mushrooms, like oyster mushrooms or shiitake mushrooms or any edible mushrooms, let's say, and you take those grains and you either steam them or you cook them. You don't cook them until they're mush and wet and sopping and soaking, where you can take a handful of them and squeeze them and water comes out. You cook them until they're just cooked enough, where there's enough water content within them so that the mycelial colonies can kind of take hold, colonize those different grains, and then you can produce those fruiting bodies from them. Because the fruiting bodies, yes, they do contain a lot of moisture, but they pull a lot of that moisture from the substrate block, and you'll see the whole block kind of shrivel up after the mycelium sort of consumes it and the fruiting bodies sprout. So that's a really good point, because yeah, you don't want it to be mush where it's really wet. It can't be dry, because then you don't have the ability for the mycelial colony to take hold of it. It has to be just right. It's like a kind of like a Goldilocks zone, some people call
It
it.
is kind of like, and then like for a tell, I don't know how you say it. It's like it's the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, in a different way. But if you have fruiting bodies, you know, like you hit where you need to be, because if they can live and the mycelium can expand and they can fruit and they're not getting overwatered to where they turn brown and die, and you see new fruiting bodies coming up, you know, constantly every couple of days. Now you know, like your soil food web is you've hit where you is the best you're gonna get.
For sure. It's like some people will call like the mycelial structure the roots of mushrooms, where like using it as an analogy for plants and their roots. And in using that analogy, they're not wrong in some aspects, where the moisture content for healthy mycelial production is roughly the same moisture content required for healthy root production and root health. So that's a really good analogy to bring up to people who have either one experience or the other, that they can then apply that to.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, and then it's easy to like for a novice approach too, because if you can see that, like that's you don't need to know anything. Like if you don't know anything, that is like that's your sign. Like you know that you're golden there once you've hit that.
For sure.
Also, then you get into like what kind of like I think I have shaggy parasols that come into the pots, and I don't know if they're necessarily from spores that are on the property or from the soil I put in, but or something, some amendment I use. I don't know like exactly where they came from, but I have the same fruiting bodies every year. Even when I
Are they?
change soils, same fruiting bodies.
And you've been able to identify them
I
as to what
kind
they
of,
are?
I'm no myco expert, but I have got on some Reddits, and that's what I've been told multiple times that they kind of fit. I haven't taken a spore print or gone into all that, but I kind of assume that's what they are. And that's kind of what I've been led to believe.
For sure. You should see if there's like I know some like mushroom production companies, like if they make a bunch of shiitake mushrooms or other things like that, they'll sell their fruiting blocks afterwards as mushroom compost. And I've seen people take those and put them into highly active substrates and then get more fruiting cycles out of it.
Oh, awesome.
Where you can then, go through and harvest a bunch of shiitakes and stuff, or oyster mushrooms or whatever it is that they have growing on them.
Well, then too, another thing to think about: are they endo or ecto mycorrhizal? Like, how are they going to interact with your plant too?
Yeah, you'd have to look into the specific type of mushroom that it is, and how that's going to interact with the plant. Some of them, I know that there are some mushrooms that are, I forget the exact term, but they're basically, some of them really like dung or manure, and some
Yep.
of them like rotted wood. Like
Oh,
it's like lignophile,
Sephoric? What is it
sephoric.
called?
Yep.
The fork is the rotting wood kind.
Yep. So there's like ones for rotting wood, ones for digested organic matter, and yeah, you'd have to wonder, is it going to be beneficial in a root zone where, like, if it recognizes the roots as if it is sephoric. I'm
Yeah, if
listeners,
it's
forgive us if we aren't using the correct terms, but if it likes wood or lignin, and it is going after the roots? Is it going to go after roots that are dead? Is it going to cause a disease to the roots that are going to cause them to die? Or is it going to leave the live roots alone and remove the dead root tissue and potentially even provide some sort of
just
beneficial
be another agent taking
yeah.
up whatever is in the compost or whatever's already in the soil and turning it into something that it can use.
Yeah, absolutely. So many of these different interactions, I feel like there's probably studies out there that have some of this information in there. So whoever finds that out, please let us know. But it's a fascinating conversation to think
It is,
about.
and that's like if you want to get into compost teas a lot more, which is a step I haven't gone, is like getting a microscope and looking at what you have in every tea you have,
Yep.
which is a step further than most home growers or most anybody who's like, I mean, if that's your profession, I could see why you'd have the time and the ability to do these things, and it's kind of nice to know, not really need to know. But I
Right.
mean, taking your tea and testing every tea you have and being like, okay, well, this is my ingredients I use and the times I use and the temperatures I'm getting a higher result out of that than I am if I do it, you can play it by ear at home, but like when you really get it down and start doing the science on it, like you could probably fine tune a tea to be pretty good.
Probably. And a lot of it would then have to do with where you're sourcing your microbial and biological consortiums and what you're feeding it. And if those different constituents change throughout the seasons as well. Like if you're using like let's say you make your own compost and you're using compost that you make all year and it's from your kitchen scrap. Well, is your kitchen scrap based on seasonally available produce? And if so, does that produce have a higher, because it's going to be cores of apple, peels of banana, shoots of broccoli, kale, whatever these things are, eggshells, coffee grounds, whatever is there that you're having, right? And, based on those, like I'm pretty sure potassium is going to be high in banana peels. So are you heavier in potassium, or are you heavier in something that's like, oh, I had a bunch of dead and dying blackberries on my bush and I threw those in there, and so you're going to have a bunch of phosphorus from the seeds of the blackberries and stuff.
Yeah.
Like what's the makeup of the compost? How is this biology going to affect it? And the source of the biology, where is that coming from?
Oh, 100%. Another thing I think about too, which is I don't really know what. So you have all your different mycorrhizals like that you can use. Like obviously you can buy a million off the store, like whatever off the shelf. Okay, when you colonize your pot with one, and then you want to use another later in the year, can it outcompete the one you've already colonized your
Sure.
pot with? Because you have all. I mean, I see a lot of. I don't want to say it's a gimmick, but it's like I can't remember the name. They have a product Megaphos and it has a special type of bacillus in there. Or,
Sure.
but do you know that that's going to outcompete what you already have in your pot, or are you just throwing, or do you already have a whole colony in 200 gallons and you're trying to recolonize it halfway
Right.
through the year? Is it even doing anything? Because I mean, if you lab test it and it does process phosphorus, that doesn't mean you're going to get it to colonize an already colonized pot. And that's like a lot of like what I haven't seen research being done is like, if you're going to colonize your pot one in the beginning, are you ever going to be able to change the composition of what's living in there, and try to recolonize it with something else?
For sure. The first thing that comes to mind about like that outcompeting of one, either let's say it's a mycelial colony. You may have like an endomycorrhizal fungi within your soil that's helping provide some benefit between the roots and the rest of the soil. But then if you introduce trichoderma, you're going to decimate that population of mycorrhizal fungi, and it's going to way outcompete it. But it's also then going to provide its own benefits to the plant, not necessarily in nutrient exchange, but in protection from like fusarium, pythium, other negative pathogens and root-borne diseases. So what's the
Like,
approach that you need to take, I think, is really truly subjective in a lot of these different cases based on what you have available and what the pressures are on your system.
oh, 100%. Yeah, that's just kind of things I think about going forward is like trying to get to the point where I know where you can know these differences, but it's very hard. It's not easy to do.
No. And like you even said, especially as an outdoor grower, your knowledge is built up season to season rather than grow to grow, where I mean, it is grow to grow, but you have to look at it as this season to season thing because
It's
you have one
1 year to
opportunity.
1 year.
Yeah, it's one opportunity per year unless you're doing some sort of light depth setup, but then you have a greenhouse basically, and you need to manage that completely differently than in your outdoor setup. What for your outdoor, one of the things that you touched on briefly earlier is that integrated pest management is very important because you only have one crop per year that you get to work with. And if you're using this as medicine or even as a recreational thing, the importance of making sure that you make it through to harvest with a limited crop per year is dire. So,
It, it's dire, and and that's not too negatively touch on it. Is like that's why I think outdoor gets a bad rap, is because some people will do whatever they have to do to make it get to the end instead of doing what's right and the hard way to get it to the end. But yes, IPM is figuring out your IPM is going to be something you need to do within the first year or two, because if you don't figure it out by then, you're never going to have good years after that. Like that's like you got to figure that out, and you got to probably talk, if you don't know, someone who's watching that doesn't know, talk to somebody who does know, and at least start with somebody's IPM that they've kind of created. Because if you go out without knowing what you're doing, you're gonna have bad time.
for sure. What are some experiences that you've had with IPM applications? Knowing that we can't necessarily tell other people how to apply their own IPMs, but in terms of where you found success with a, let's say, an early detection that you were able to eradicate, and then perhaps something that maybe got out of control that you weren't necessarily able to fight back within that specific season, where it did then negatively affect your yields.
So when I look at IPM and doing organic and not using any non-approved sprays, like, so even spinosad is not approved in California anymore, even though it is organic. So you got to look at, like, I'm very, very religious on not using anything that has any sort of negative effect on human health that has been proven.
Sure.
So, and when you're looking at it in an outdoor sense, it's not, I'm never going to get bugs. It's like, you are going to get something, and you need to know that it is going to happen. And what you want to do is get in place an IPM that is going to is going to reduce the chance of it happening. And if it does happen, slow it down so you have time to react.
I've heard it referred to as achieving an economic threshold.
Yes, there's going to be pressure and there's going to be pest pressure, but you need to
Right.
keep it very, very low and keep control of it, because you're
Right.
never going to have the plant's outside. You're never going to not have bugs. So for
Right.
anybody to say that I never had bugs this year that's an untruth. Like, did you control it, and did you do a good job and not have any negative effects from it? Yes. Did you not have any bugs on your plants? No, because I even use beneficial insects. Like, we have green lacewing here that come around naturally on the plants. There's ladybug larvae, there's assassin bugs, there's stuff that, like, so you're going to have bugs on your plants that aren't bad that you're going to want there. So it's like kind of managing that and trying to pick something that is going to keep the pressure at bay and allow you to make a choice. And that's what I was saying earlier. So I like to use Marone Bio Innovations. They have, Grand Evo and Venerate, which are two really good sprays that, if you're going to be consistent and use them, work very well. But they are not going to save you by any means. Like, if you go out and you weren't doing anything and you see that problem, like, there's only a few products that you can use that are going to be organic and safe, that are actually going to help you, and they're going to be contact sprays at best. Like, you're going to have to go out and do it religiously to bring the pressure back down to where you want it to be. So I'd say being on top of that and figuring out a cycle of 3 products you want to use. So when I'm in veg, I use a mixture of mineral oil. I'll use Grand Evo and Venerate. And then when I start going into flower, I'll pull the oils out. So I won't use any mineral oil, stylet oil. If I was going to use neem oil, I won't use that anymore. Or if you are going to use neem oil, you're going to back that out. And then I found another product, I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically sugars that they found that plants produce on their own, and they've synthesized them, and they're sort of like a different type of sucralose.
On guard?
Huh?
Is it On Guard?
On Guard, or it's called...
Regalia? Or you said Regalia, right?
No, I don't really use Regalia.
Okay.
I was thinking about using it, but that's more to trigger a plant immune response to, like, funguses and stuff. But I'll think of the name, or I'll grab it in a minute. But anyway, you're going to move into keep using your Venerate, your Grand Evo, and then move into a contact spray that you're going to want to spray every 3 or 4 days, because you're just going to, at a certain point, you're just going to say, I assume that I have pests and I'm going to spray for them, and you have to be religious about it.
Right.
And then you follow that through, and then right about flower, like right when you get into like the last 2 weeks, you need to, as hard as it is to do, you're going to need to spray for caterpillars still, which is going to be BT.
Yep.
As much as nobody outdoor wants as much as nobody wants to spray their bud with anything, however safe it is, if you don't, I feel like the consequences of having caterpillars and having caterpillar excrement and having mold and all that is way more harmful than having sprayed with BT.
Yeah.
Personal
I
opinion.
mean, Bacillus thuringiensis is not a harsh biology that would then negatively affect the end user. It doesn't produce mycotoxins or anything like that that would affect someone, whether it be through consumption, through combustion, vaporization, or turning it into it like a tincture edible or otherwise. And that's been proven through its application on, numerous crops that have the potential for caterpillars. It makes me think of a lot of like different brassicas, such as cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, all those different things that you need to have something like that sprayed into them, or else you are going to lose 50% of your crop each year.
Oh, you are, and then the negative ramifications of having mold in there. Like, so I don't know about cauliflower, but cannabis, you don't want to take anything into the drying room that has mold in it, because now you have a sealed environment where if you don't have control over if you get any spikes in humidity, you're literally creating a culture, like a
Yep.
petri dish in there to spread mold to everything. And so, like, caterpillars is like, I mean, I hate caterpillars, and I'm sure every outdoor grower can say the exact same thing, but like, if you think you're spraying too early for caterpillars when it comes to flower, you're not. Just go ahead and do it.
For sure. Since you do hang a lot of your end product outdoor for smokable flower as well as for concentrates, do you end up doing any sort of washes on your flower to remove dust, debris, insect droppings, carcasses, or otherwise?
I do not, and I've thought about doing it. I haven't tested it yet, and I've heard mixed results. I
Yeah.
just don't know. It would probably depend on how dry it is when you're harvesting, because if you've already had your plants outside in 80% humidity every morning for 2 weeks, and then you dunk them in a bucket of water and then put them in the drying room, I haven't tried this, but I have a feeling from past experience that you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, I don't see that turning out too good.
Yeah, and I'm not against washing it. I don't think it's a bad idea by any means. But if you're going to destroy everything and not have anything at the end, then people who smoke outdoor, what comes.
Absolutely, I feel
It's like
there's there's a little bit of a charm to outdoor bud that it has so much more characteristic to it. Let's say, and regardless if that's due to the extra stuff that comes along with it, it's been something that people have used for centuries, thousands of years.
100%.
And the fact that we now have these pampered pallets of indoor cannabis in environmentally controlled sort of clean rooms in some
Filtered
cases.
air, filtered water, never sees anything other than Yeah, I mean, I'm not, and I love that, and that's awesome that we do that. But also, you can't throw everything that got to that point out and just say like, outdoors in the past. I feel
sure.
like a lot of people do that, and a lot of people, newer generations especially, that haven't been around a while. Like, I know people that I've like talked to that don't know what brickweed is.
For sure.
That don't know, you've lost this idea of what weed is came, and like now it's just all indoor, and there's everything before it doesn't exist.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, in some senses, it'll never go back. So, well, maybe I shouldn't speak so soon on that. Who knows? Maybe it'll go back to something that's less than quality, depending on how things change if federal legalization ever goes through. But
I don't want to think about that, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
No, we don't want to talk about Philip Reynolds right now. So with the fact that you do save a lot of your flour for both dried flour as it is, and then you do a lot of, it seems like you do a lot of concentrates as well. What have been some of your most memorable harvests as both flour and concentrate?
Most memorable harvest. So at this property, I'd say this year, as far as flour and concentrates go, the government oasis I grew did phenomenal for both. 100%.
Nice.
And as far as like doing concentrates go, I like doing concentrates, but another aspect that a lot of people need to think about too is that you cut your labor down to nothing by doing concentrates. Like doing fresh frozen, you're cutting out you're harvesting and it takes a little bit longer. You're cutting out drying, you're cutting out curing, you're cutting out bucking down, you're cutting out big leafing, you're cutting out trimming, you're cutting off, like 3-4 months worth of work by doing that. Which
Right.
you do get a very excellent product depending on who you find to work with, and if someone's willing to work with you, which I've been lucky enough to find somebody that's pretty proficient at what they do and very regarded. But yeah, that's another aspect to think about is doing fresh frozen cuts your labor down because growing outdoor is a very labor intensive job every step of it, every step of the way.
Yep. And another cool thing about fresh frozen is, like even we touched on before about, but somehow how some people will wash their buds from outdoor or even indoor if they so feel like it. But I've heard a majority of people will do it for health reasons because they just can't have those extra things that come and take a ride in on that outdoor bud. But if you're doing fresh frozen and you're washing it for the trichome heads, you do remove a lot of those other potential dusts and bugs and
100%,
other
and
things.
that's why when you do outdoor fresh frozen, you're doing rosin, the first wash, you're never going to have, so any reputable rosin producer is never going to have a first wash because the first wash is considered contaminated. So the first wash is going to be taken set aside for edibles. And that's like, so if you're going to do a wash and you're going to do, the guy that taught me does 5 washes. So the first wash is going to be a very quick wash. It's going to be your best trichome heads, and it's also going to be all your contaminants. So it's kind of a double-edged sword because you're washing off all the brightest, easiest to break off trikes, and you're taking all your contamination and you're setting it to the side for edibles.
Are they not rinsing it?
Oh, they do you do their first wash and you rinse it and you collect all that and you set it to the side. It's considered contaminated. Now, I don't know if they've
Really?
studied this or whatever. I don't know. I don't know how deep the research into this goes. I'm sure it's there. But that you're doing your wash and your first wash or the first harvest you get out of whatever your material you're washing is set to the side for edibles because you're taking all your contaminants or anything that could be in there and pushing it out. And you're not pressing that or freeze drying it or turning it into a smokable product. So you are getting a cleaner product from that. Even though you are taking the best of the best trichome heads and setting them to the side.
Sure. That's really fascinating. I've never heard that before, but I could see how, depending on the washing practices, that might be necessary to really make sort of, maybe this is like one of those tricks that people use to get that 5-star hash, 6-star hash, or whatever, the stuff that you can just straight take the nice,
no contaminants when it's done.
Yep, and you can, it's dabbable basically at that point. That's really fascinating. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, and that's a way that, so like when it cleans it up a little bit. So that is also the benefit from doing, if you're going to fresh frozen, not for resin, but for rosin, you are going to get a cleaner end product that you can have too. So if you are concerned about contaminants from outdoor health issues or you're sensitive or whatever's going on with that, that's going to be a better product choice.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense.
I smoke bud, but the older I get, I realize why people stop smoking bud. It's not, you're still smoking and combusting something.
For sure. I had to just completely stop actually smoking. I like combusting, and I only do like a volcano vaporizer now or one of their handheld units because it just there's no way to kind of avoid what comes with combustion.
You're not smoking cigarettes, but over however long you've been smoking does factor into that at a certain point.
Yeah. Well, I spent a decade smoking cigarettes too, and that didn't help me. So now I get to face those consequences.
I'm in the same boat, sir.
Yeah, I mean that, and then also growing up in the Bay Area, I think blunts were life at one point, and yeah, I face those consequences now with a little bit of a cough every once in a while.
100%. You knew when you're younger, you're like, fuck it. Then you get older and you're like, you know what? Maybe I need to rethink this a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, all right. So, you know, since you spent some time doing the cultivation thing, at a professional level where you were helping out at these different farms, where you were learning these different practices and ins and out, and got a paycheck basically from it without having to be the entire business owner yourself, and then moving into having your own home grow where you were making it for your own medicine and for your own consumption, and for sharing that flower with other people. Um, where would you like to see the cultivation space sort of go over the next 5 to 10 years? And where do you think as though it could improve?
Where does it need to? It needs to be more less consuming energy. And I know saying that to an indoor grower is a bad thing, but there is a mass amount of energy consumed to grow bud for people to smoke
It is. Yeah.
when there's ways that can be done without that. And I think how the market has been trained as far as since legalization came about and people that we know would never think about smoking weed or putting a thought in it are now smoking, and they the only thing they learned of what they've been taught at the dispensary, which is
Yeah.
indoor weed is good, outdoor weed is shitty, and that's like that's as far as the extent goes. And I'm not saying indoor weed, well, most stuff at the dispensary, let's not lie, is not very good, but there are good there is a way to grow weed without being so carbon heavy using it, carbon
Yeah.
heavy and growing it. I think there needs to be a shift to that, because if you look at how many warehouses have been built to grow weed, or how many warehouses have been repurposed, and there's the thousands of lights in there just run the meter, is kind of like working away from that. And the thing about outdoor that gets a bad rap is if you're going to try to grow 300 plants with 5 people, you're not going to grow good weed. Like, it needs to be brought down to a smaller scale, which I don't ever see happening. I would like to see that, but I don't think that it's going to be there. But if you can grow outdoor and you can figure out how much you can do to grow, like that's where I'm at. I have 15 plants. Probably can't grow more than 15 plants and still do what I do because I'm going to overburden myself with labor,
Yeah.
and that's his personal perspective. But to see the market go to more of a niche, smaller farmer kind of thing, and making it more accessible to smaller growers to get into the market, rather than just saying, if you don't have $2 million in backing, you're never going to be a business, is kind of where it's at now. I feel maybe not so much in Oregon, but as far as Colorado and California go, like, you're not getting into the market.
No, it's kind of the same in Oregon right now, and with the price per pound going down significantly over the past 3 years, and continuing to go down, while the cost of production continues to go up, it does seem as though any point that you can reduce your costs, or increase the not only the quality but the quantity of production, unfortunately, is extremely important to make sure that small businesses continue to remain viable. A lot of these larger businesses, because overhead costs go down as you scale up, when it comes to like how much it costs to run a business versus how much income
Oh,
that business makes.
your net your cost to grow a pound goes down when you grow more, obviously. But
Yes.
what entails that? Does the quality go down? Nothing, no other factors measured other than what can I produce for
It's all the bottom
less
line.
money?
Yep.
Yes.
And that is unfortunate. And I mentioned R.J. Reynolds earlier, and other large, either tobacco companies or other multi-conglomerate companies that may pivot into the cannabis space if it were to become federally legal, are going to be able to produce uh, cannabis. I, Fortunately and unfortunately, we've been able to increase how well cannabis can be grown with less of a uh, like secretive nature to the processes behind it. A lot of this information is now more readily available, and companies with lots of expendable revenue that they can put into research and development and creating methodologies that produce cannabis at a specific level, especially if they're homogenizing an end product like a pre-roll or something like that, or a concentrate. Companies that have the ability to produce vast amounts of cannabis and get it to the market for a very low price, but maintain consistency and a certain level of quality, not necessarily, top shelf, highest quality, that guy with 4 lights in his garage that's growing everything in a living soil bed and just crushing it. Like not that level of quality, but something where it's smokable. It's not going to get you sick because it has a specific level of standard that it has to be held to because you have all
Well,
these different regulations. You're going to have something that's going to be usable, but it's going to be Coors Light. It's going to be,
yeah, I was going to say you're talking Miller Lite.
yeah, it's going to be something that is a lower quality product, but it's going to be consistent and it's going to garner the most use out of your average consumer. Because for me, like I used to be a chef, but I still love getting a burger from like In-N-Out or McDonald's or something where it's consistent. I know exactly what it's going to be. Going to a burger house or something where it's a fancy restaurant that has a really nice burger, sometimes I'm like, did they do too much? Did they not do enough? Am I going to be overpaying and way under liking what it is?
Oh, 100%. Um, yeah, that's when the top comes off and it fully goes legal, it's going to be a race to mediocrity, to say, not to be negative about it, but it's going to be a race to the middle, not to the bottom or the top.
Because it has to like meet some standards for enough people to be repeat customers, because that's the only way that they're going to be able to maintain any sort of business model like that. But it can't be the best because that's going to cost too much to produce, and it can't be the worst because, well, no one's going to want to come back to it. So it has to be somewhere in the middle. And there's a lot of advancements in technology within the cannabis space, like the distillation of different terpenes and the mixing of different terpene profiles to match specific cannabis cultivars, and doing that through either gathered terpenes from cannabis production or synthetically produced terpenes, or exogenously sourced terpenes from non-cannabis related, still like natural sources, but then the mixing of those and the application of that to, pre-roll flower, or even whole pounds of what looks like nice cannabis, but may be completely terpless when it's done drying and curing because they dried and cured it in 5 days.
Yeah, or whatever race to the end goal was. Yeah, yeah. Well, like what I've noticed here in California, I'm sure it's the same everywhere, is so when I came out here, it was full boom, like farmers everywhere. Like nobody liked, I don't want to say nobody liked farmers. There were farmers everywhere, and they got a bad rap from coming in from out of, different states, coming and setting up shop, trashing everything and leaving, and being able to survive as a business while creating a product that was horrible just because of the lack of demand. And the kind of approach I took as like leaving the industry, so to say, and finding a different career and then still doing what I'm doing, is like you're watching all of these legacy farmers fall off left and right. And obviously by quality first. Like the lower quality farmers are dropping off. The mid quality farmers are dropping off. Even people that grew pretty decent flower either change their practices based on how much money they could get out of it, right? So if you're not getting 3,000 a pound anymore, you're getting, 250 to 500 a pound. Well, all the practices they use to grow good weed, they're not doing anymore because they're trying to survive. So all of your high end flower on the outdoor scene is starting to fall off too, and you're starting to lose any good outdoor flower that you can find. I mean, it's hard to find good outdoor weed,
Yep,
which
I
only
agree.
furthers the whole thing that outdoor is not good, which is like it's stigmatizing. Almost, it's like it's starting the self-ending cycle of like it's just going to try to burn itself out.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the snake that eats its tail, the Ouroboros. It's just going around and continuing to eat itself, and it's never going to stop. Um, yeah, I agree with that. It is unfortunate to see sort of some of these trends that it almost it's going to be hard to break the cycles and these trends that they've already started, because as the price per pound goes down, yeah, you can pivot away from more expensive inputs, less intensive farming practices. But if it was those intensive farming practices or the specific inputs or different things that you did to make your farm work, because as you know, these are plants and they're growing and they're alive and they need things to make sure that they stay alive. And if you start to remove those different things, maybe your plants don't survive a year. Maybe you have a failed half crop or something like that. And maybe that crop was what was needed to keep the lights on, or, you know.
Oh, 100%.
So, you know, so because, yeah, it feels like the way that things are moving away from smaller growers being able to provide for their local community to larger scale growers providing for a more macro community um, within each state, and how home growing seems to be sort of one of the last bastions of ability for people to produce the medicine that they want or the cannabis that they want, not necessarily what's available on the market. What would be some advice that you would give to new growers based on your successes and failures as a grower yourself?
Advice I would give to new growers is don't stop doing what you're doing. It's very, very easy to get discouraged to have a bad year. And especially like if you care about what you do and it's a passion project and you're doing this because you believe in it, it's really easy to get disheartened having a bad year. Like you can have a bad year and your bad year can be six, like if you're outdoor, it could be 6 months long that you are just like, and you don't want to do it next year. You know, so like what if you choose to start growing outdoor and you want to grow what you want to grow for you, and then you need to kind of take pride in that. And like you're going to take some hits to the face, you're going to get knocked down, and it's like, I mean, you're not going to know what you're doing. You're going to get blindsided by pests. You're going to not know, you're going to kill a plant. You're going to, you know, all these things are going to happen. And it's not something that you need to stop doing it because of that. Like you need to like try to remove the emotion from it and like logically look at what you're doing. Because when you put a bunch of time and effort into something, especially like an outdoor, even what I do is considered small, you know, on the scale of outdoors. Like it's easy to like, I mean, you got to just keep rolling with it.
Yeah, it seems like something that it seems like to be a repeat advice for new growers is don't let your failures remain failures. Let them become a learning lesson so that you can take that information that you gain within that failure so that you don't then face those same failures again in the future.
100%. And it's like when you first start growing, it's like falling up the stairs. Like you're gonna hit you're gonna just keep fucking up until you end up to a spot where you have something that you like kind of understand what you're doing. And like we saw touch on before, you get one shot a year. Don't let the first year that you just completely fuck the whole thing up stop you from trying to get in the next year.
For sure. It's just like any other skill or practice. There's plenty of different books or ideologies that will say, you know, you need 10,000 hours of practice to become a master at something, or, you know, 1,000,000 hours of practice to become, you know, proficient at something. I don't forget the exact, or I forget the exact numbers, but repetition and perseverance through a lot of these different practices and aspects of cultivation are what are going to make you a better cultivator overall. And every time you fail, if you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and say, "That sucked. I don't want that to happen again. How am I going to prevent that?" Yeah.
Be like, I failed, and this is what I did wrong. Don't try to blame or figure out some reason why it wasn't what you did. Which I mean, that's generally in life too. If you can accept the responsibility, you can move on. Another thing I would offer to new growers is don't be afraid to ask questions. Because I don't remember, one of the Jungle Boys growers said that you can give people the tech and they won't use it anyway. Like there's like some sort of ego about growing, and I don't understand like how it works that no one wants to listen to that other person. And I'm sure you've experienced this. Like you could be like, I know what you're doing wrong, change this. Okay, well, if you're not, because I said that, you're not going to do it now, or whatever it may be. Like, don't be afraid to ask for advice and find somebody that does grow and pick their brain. Because especially with outdoor, if someone like, I've been growing about a decade, if it's your first outdoor and you have access to somebody who's been doing it for 10 years, like that's going to be your key to getting better quicker. Like you're not going to get the actual experience doing it, but like you're going to learn, don't do A, B, C, and D. And then that's going to keep you from that's going to bring in like your success to be like, I know I'm not going to fail this way. And I know I'm not going to screw it up this way. Like listen to people around you that have done it. Like don't be too egocentric that you can't take advice from somebody, because if you get one shot a year, it's going to take a long time to get good, and you might as well talk to somebody who's done it and get some, like, take their input.
Yeah. I was just going to say, don't let pride and ego stand in your way. It's hard to grow really good cannabis, and not necessarily because like the processes are hard, but because there's so many different aspects to it that can fail, and without knowing what those things are ahead of time or how to react to them, you can have this sort of snowball effect and cause an avalanche to fall down on the grow around you without setting up those proper barriers to prevent it.
Well, that too. And then you talk about the whole atmosphere online, like from Instagram, it's like, it's so egocentric to grow weed. Like, and I don't on a mass scale, it's like a personal pride, and like everybody's ego is literally tied to them growing weed, that like even new growers, like even if you were to stumble upon Instagram, like this is the vibe that the whole industry gives off. And it's like this, fuck you, I'm the best kind of vibe, which, I mean, when you get people with a lot of experience, you have people who are showing off, and there is ego in there, and there is, pride in people's work. But like from an outside perspective, if you were just trying to get into it, like looking at all like the way that people think and act about cannabis online is not going to help you in reality. Like all it's going to do is hold you back, and it's kind of gatekeeping in like a brainwash way, that everyone acts like they're so good and you're never going to get to their level, which is not true at all. Like, I mean, there's plenty of people that are open to discussing and giving advice, but like when you look at the grand vibe of everything online, it's telling you the opposite, and you don't need to believe that.
Nope. Yeah, that is the exact opposite of what's the truth to growing. There are more people that are going to be willing to teach you how to grow and help you along the way, especially when it comes to trying to help fix something, or trying to help prevent something, or react to something, or set up the best practices ahead of time so that you don't run into those issues. There's so many people that want to help new growers, because without new growers getting into this, it could eventually become something stagnant that does go to only the people who can afford it. And that's when we do start to run into issues like we were talking about earlier, of larger companies being the only source for cannabis. And if that's what can happen, we want to try and prevent that. And by trying to prevent that, I think one of the best ways that we can is by promoting home growers to continue to grow, and to do it as best as they possibly can, because it's just as easy to produce enough for yourself as it is to produce enough for yourself and a few other people. And if the other people see that you can produce it for them, maybe they want to get into it, and it can just spread and spread and spread. And hopefully, eventually, I've heard other people say we want to overgrow the nation, where there's just more growers than people know what to do with. And so larger corporations don't have an opportunity to enter the market because there's just no demand. Something like that would be off.
100%. And that's like, kind of like, I don't want to sound egocentric. Like I can go down to the dispensary and buy the most expensive weed there, and the stuff that I grow like blows it out of the water. Like, sure. And that's like where what you don't realize is like, or what a lot of people don't realize is whoever's advertising to you that they have the best weed at the dispensary or wherever is full of shit in its marketing 90% of the time. I don't want to say it always is. Like, you're going to find stuff that's really good there, but you're not going to find it being advertised very heavily, and there's not going to be a lot of it, and it's going to be very niche.
Definitely.
It's not hard to get. I mean, I won't say it's not hard. It's not impossible to outcompete a lot of the commercial growers. Just from the reasons like you said before. Yes, in terms of quality. It's not hard to outcompete, like from a home grower aspect. And that's what people need to realize too, is that like people talk a big game about a lot of the weed, especially in like the commercial sense and like the legal industry, but it's all hype. Like not all of it, but there's a lot of fluff in there. And there's a lot of people that don't know what they're doing, and a lot of people that have grew 2 years and now have a job growing. And like, there's a lot of a lack of legacy in that market that like it's not hard to get up to where they're at.
It's not a lot of it, like I said earlier, there's so much accessible information online or through communities or forums or chat groups, Discords, Reddits, Instagram pages. It's everywhere now.
I know a really good Reddit page.
Yeah, we know a pretty good Reddit page. r/craft marijuana on Reddit. Check it out. Some of the better growers that you're going to find within the Reddit cannabis sphere. But yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate your insights into organic home growing, especially as it pertains to outdoor practices and maintaining a specific level of quality and high expectations for what you want out of the cannabis that you are growing for yourself. So I just have a few little wrap-up questions to ask you
Wrap it up.
that I like to ask everyone. So what's your favorite strain of all time?
My favorite strain of all time. Oh, that's a hard question. Favorite strain of all time. Chernobyl is one of them. Lamb's Bread or Breath is one of them. And then Cinderella 99 is one of them. And I haven't smoked the new Cinderella 99, but like, it's hard to keep strains through the decades, like, so what I might have be saying is what one of my favorite Durban Poison, but Durban Poison when I was in like college, like 07, not like the Durban I've seen now.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so with Chernobyl, Cinderella, and yeah, those are two of my favorites.
Awesome. Those are some really good ones. So then with those being your favorite strains, who would be your favorite breeder of all time?
My favorite breeder of all time. Ooh, that's a hard one. I have one person that I really like based on the work that I've grown, and it's Obsolete. Obsolete is a really good breeder. His stuff, I try to collect auctions, seed auctions, get everything I can. Orange Cookies is one of his strains I grow. I don't want to say it's one of my favorite strains of all time, but that is a very, very nice plant. And there's some other stuff like Orange Fruity Pebbles I've grown from him. High Octane. He has a lot of good stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. And then just the last little question here. What is your most memorable cannabis-related experience?
Most memorable in a good or a bad way? I kind of want to tell my raid story just so people that weren't around when this was a thing understand this.
That sounds like it could be a memorable story.
It was very memorable. So I worked at the first job I had where I was running the farm, and it was the one I told you about in Lake County. So it was on the side of a mountain, and it was off Bottle Rock Road. If you want to look it up in Lake County, I think it's Kelseyville, California. So it's kind of in the middle of nowhere on the side of this mountain. And you had to drive this really long, windy fucking gravel road that you could barely get a car up to get there. And I think it was mid-August, late August. And where I stayed was in this shack on the side. This sounds really stupid, but there was a shack on the mountain on stilts. And so there was a shed basically on top of these stilts. And I remember sitting there one day, and it was probably noon. It was like in the middle of the day when it was hot. So I was inside, and I heard a car. And I'm like, I don't recognize this car. I don't recognize the sound of this car. And so I opened the door up to the shack, and I look out, and I have a bunch of guys pointing AR-15s at me. And so the sheriff had walked up in front of the truck that was driving. So they were already at the door. So you get the full raid experience. They're screaming at you, pointing guns at you, telling you to get on the ground. Like, I get out of there, and at the time, I was on the side of a mountain, so I didn't wear shoes the whole time. Hippie shit. So I go out of the shack. They're screaming at me to get on the ground, freeze. They're asking me where my shoes are at. I don't have any shoes. And they get up, and, they're the tough guys, So they arrest me, and I'm sitting there, and I'm shaking while they're putting me in handcuffs. And the guy looks at me, he's like, why are you so nervous, huh? What are you nervous about? And I was like, I've never been arrested before. And you see the look in these guys' face just go from, like, they've got the bad guy to, like, oh, okay. And so they handcuff me, they put me up, and they set me off to the side. And they sit there they take the side-by-side and everything that's on the property. And it takes them 6 hours to cut all these plants down because they're caged. So they have me sitting there watching them cut all these plants down that I spent all year growing, and dragging them in front of me and putting on this whole, production that, they like, shame on you. Look at all what we're doing. It wasn't very fun.
No.
That's probably the most memorable one. That was the one that impacted me the most. I won't say in a positive way, but kind of seeing how you always hear about people getting raided, and you hear about like the past, like the cops and the helicopters. Like when you're involved in that, that is like they aren't fucking around.
Oh, that sounds quite terrifying,
It
actually,
was a little traumatizing, but it definitely made an impact on me.
for sure. Well, I mean, it seems like you made it out of there, semi unscathed.
I did
Um,
make yes, 100%.
that's good.
It was a whole thing that ran on for about 2 years. But yeah, for anybody who's watching that wasn't around in the black market days, like getting raided is definitely a scary, not fun experience that I'm glad we've kind of gotten past as a cannabis community and law enforcement and how well they don't interact together.
Wow. Well, I mean, that is definitely a memorable cannabis related experience that, not a lot of people are going to have to face nowadays. So, bringing up those
I'm happy
stories.
for them.
Yeah,
I'm
me
happy for
too.
them that they don't have to experience that.
Me too. Well, again, Westin Peace, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. Did you have any little shout outs or plugs you wanted to give before we wrap it up?
I just want to shout out our craft marijuana. Shout out you. Thanks for inviting me, Nick. And then
Yeah.
if anybody feels inclined to check out my Instagram, that'd be sweet. I have a lot of pictures of my grows, and if you want to get a hold of me on Reddit or Instagram, I'll answer anybody's questions. I have no problem talking about what I do with anybody. It'd probably be easier to get us some good in-depth explanations when I have time to type out my questions. So if anybody wants to pick my brain or ever contact me for information, open doors.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
I hope so too. Nice talking to you, dude.
Awesome. Peace.